So tonight we're going to talk about, so I sort of titled these talks as need to know talks for meditators. These are the types of things that anyone who aspires for their meditation practice to yield a result, a specific result, has to have a minimum effective base of knowledge. Because the tradition is so old, there's a lot you can know. But knowing all of that stuff takes a lot of time, and that time would probably be better served working on your meditation practice. So it's important to know what you need to know, and you don't really need to know any more than that. So it's a minimum effective approach. We want to have an understanding of what we're even doing when we're meditating. Because as we know, 2,600 years ago, a particularly gifted individual who was one person in a population of people who were meditating, he developed something that had not been developed before in the 1,000 years of meditation expertise before then. So in India in the 5th century BCE, there was a culture of tremendous concentration practice, which yielded these deep absorptions. And there was a thought that those absorptions, and some people still try to practice these, but there was a thought that these absorptions would lead to something worth sacrificing your life basically for. And the Buddha was looking for an answer to suffering. That's what he was wanting. How can I become liberated from suffering? So he took up the practice of meditation with teachers, two famous teachers of the day, and he mastered their systems and felt that they really weren't doing anything other than becoming highly concentrated. There was no liberation from suffering involved. They believed, because they adopted the kind of Indian cosmology, that if they meditated strictly and withdrew themselves from worldly experience, that at the point of death, they would be unified with their true self. And that was the belief at the time. It probably still is some dimension of that in current Hinduism. But the Buddha achieved all of those meditative absorptions and felt that indeed they were powerful states of mind, but they were just powerful states of mind. They weren't going to lead to some liberation from suffering. They weren't even going to lead to liberation from confusion. So something just wasn't as advertised. And so the story that we have is that the Buddha approached his teachers and said, I want to thank you for everything you've given me, but this is not what I'm looking for. And they accepted that. They were upset because he was like I described last night, he was the Tiger Woods of meditation. No one else really had demonstrated that ability to so rapidly accomplish those stages. And so after a period of time, 10 years or so, he combined the old practices that he had learned from those, called jhana practices or deep meditative absorptions, with a factor of mind called mindfulness. And mindfulness was added in to concentration, and that was just the mixture necessary for him to basically stumble upon this developmental path which catalyzes a transformation of cognition. And that transformation of cognition is the point of the entire tradition. It's called bodhi, and we translate bodhi as waking up or awakening. And one who had undergone that transformation at that point was called a Buddha. So Buddha is one who has accomplished bodhi. And so he was called the Buddha because he had accomplished this thing that everyone had been looking for. And what's super important, I think, and becoming more important these days, is for us to comb through everything we've heard about the tradition of this person, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and understand that he passed this down to his students. He didn't want anything set up to worship him. He didn't want any structure of religion whatsoever. He just wanted this to be a human-to-human tradition of people developing their mind to the point where they had this cognitive event called bodhi, and then they would pass it to the next generation. But that's not really the way it happened. It's now looked at as one of the world's great religions. And even people like the Dalai Lama will talk about this as a religion. It's kind of hard to coexist between something which is specifically not a religion in its early days to something which is one of the world's great religions 2,600 years later. So rather than raise a ruckus and try and have it reclassified in the Encyclopedia Britannica, what modern teachers and practitioners are trying to do, or at least people like me, we're trying to emphasize the practical element without emphasizing any of the so-called spiritual stuff, and just demonstrate that these things can work on their own merits. And the way that they work is by understanding what meditation is doing. So meditation is not a way to work with the information that we've accumulated, our education. Meditation doesn't really have much to do with that. Some meditators are very learned people, and some meditators are very simple people, and it doesn't make any difference at all. Both people can accomplish the same degree of meditation. Someone has to be intelligent enough to follow instructions and think critically, but they don't need storehouses of knowledge available to them. So it's not about information and education. It's also not about physical health. Someone does not have to be a robust young person in order to meditate. In fact, as we see in the West, people often come to meditation in the second half of their life because they've sort of experienced what life was about, and now they're looking for something more profound or more meaningful, and they don't want to get involved with religion, and so they end up hearing about meditation. Maybe they read a few books, and then they show up at a class. And as you've probably heard me say, those are almost always the most diligent students. They're almost always the most diligent students, people who come in the last act of life. And the wonderful thing about it is that meditation practice does not seem to depend on any specific state of health associated with early life. So there are great meditators who started in their 80s, people who accomplished a lot. Now, if you're already experiencing dementia or you have a brain injury of some type, there can be difficulties, but they may be surmountable. So meditation doesn't work with physical health, and it doesn't work with knowledge. It works with what's called conscious experience. So conscious experience is whatever we are experiencing in this moment. And there are two modes that we can experience consciously. We can experience through inference, and we can experience directly. And those two are important, so I'm going to give you a little exercise. You know that you're conscious right now, right? I mean, does anyone doubt that they are conscious? Are you conscious? Everyone who's conscious, raise their hand. Sometimes. Were you conscious this morning at 8 a.m.? Yes? Sure. Who else was? Conscious? What did you do to determine that you were conscious at 8 a.m.? What did you do? Yeah.
I had planned for my day. I'd already been to a meeting.
Okay, so what went on? What is that? What are you doing in order to determine that you were conscious at 8 a.m.?
Well, I was awake.
But what are you doing now to determine that you were? I agree with you. Yeah, that's it.
Remember.
Exactly. So we're pulling something from memory, and we're assessing that in order for me to remember this, I had to have been there. So I was conscious then. And that's satisfying, right? Wait, that's not satisfying to you.
I don't know. Keep going.
Okay.
He'll catch you.
Because I aim to satisfy. Conscious experience is experience that we somehow know that we're having. We don't know that our best friend that we haven't seen since kindergarten was conscious this morning, right? We don't even know if they're still alive. We have no idea. We're not able to be conscious of someone else's experience. We're able to be conscious of our experience. So the mind is able to tell that it exists. And we can tell inferentially by remembering something that happened in the past. Yes, I was there. And sometimes we're a little wrong about that. Maybe we misremember something, but we're not going to misremember that we were. We might misremember what was said or what we were doing, but we know that we existed last year. I mean, as I look out, I don't see anyone who's less than a year old. So I know that everyone here was conscious a year ago. I'm inferring that based on the information that your bodies look older than a year. I mean, they look youthful and they look good, but they just don't look baby-like. Next question. Are you conscious now?
Yes.
Are you conscious now? It's not a trick question.
Yes.
Conscious now?
Yeah.
Dead?
Yeah.
Yes. How do you know? What are you doing?
Listening to you.
But how do you know that you're conscious now?
Because I'm having experiences.
That's inferential, or is that direct?
Direct.
Direct. Look at your consciousness right now. It doesn't mean you have to look at any one thing, but be aware that you are here, that you are aware. Right? It can be done. There was an entire system of modern philosophy that began with Rene Descartes, who was trying to determine if there's anything whatsoever that we could be certain of. So he went through this thing called systematic doubting. I don't know when Rene Descartes was. I think he was in the 18th century. And he kept thinking to himself that he could doubt everything there was because it could be a hallucination. I think I see the gong, but I've thought that I've seen other things that weren't there. So it seems like it's likely, but it's not certain. So I can doubt that. But is there anything I can't doubt? And of course, as we all know the punchline, he came to the point where he was consciously aware of the thoughts in his head. And so he said, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. And that was to him remarkable. It was like his eureka moment. He knows that he's awake, and there's no way to doubt that, because if he doubts that, he has to be there to doubt it. So he is awake. Get it? This is important to some people. Yes, Wayne?
So thoughts are, my understanding, are a result of dependent origination, just like everything else.
They are. Yeah.
But mind or consciousness is not.
Is.
It is?
Yeah, well, mind is, but mind, consciousness, and awareness are different things. So consciousness and awareness in the meditative teachings are not exactly the same thing. But some things are, yes, are produced, and some things not so.
So consciousness always existed, exists, and always will exist.
No, well, consciousness is created. Okay, We'll get there. We'll get there. Conscious experience is what we're using when we meditate. We don't meditate in the past, and we don't meditate in the future, and we don't meditate on the past, and we don't meditate on the future. In the beginning of our practice, we're meditating on the present. But that's only because we're only able to meditate on something like a thought. Eventually, the mind relaxes and it meditates beyond past, present, and future. And I know that sounds woo-woo, but that's that's essentially where meditation is transporting us. In order for us to work with our mind in this way, we have to have certain skills that most of us have somewhat, but not much. And that is, we have to have the faculty of staying put at will, our mind. So most of us are plagued with wandering mind, and that's just the human condition. Anyone here not plagued with wandering mind? Or do I need to repeat that? Was your mind wandering?
So that's kind of what I was thinking, though, is...
Wait, would you give him the
always conscious.
microphone? What's that?
So you are not always conscious. You can be awake but not be conscious by that thought, by what you just said, though, right?
You can say, like,
If being conscious is in part memory and what you're doing at the moment, if your mind is wandering, are you really conscious then?
I see what you're saying. How do you know that your mind was wandering?
I usually don't until, I guess, it's the right word, meta-awareness kicks in. I realize my mind has wandered off. Then I'm conscious again, but at the time it was wandering, I was not conscious.
If you have a memory of something, even if it's a memory of dimness, then some degree of awareness was quite vivid, in fact. But yes, what you're saying is there are points where we don't have much recollection of an experience that we had, like deep sleep. Deep sleep is a good example. We don't have any memory of it. Yet we know that we were there. We didn't die. We came out of it. So what the question you're asking, Paul, is what do we call the continuity of mind even when it's not aware? And there are various ways of talking about it, but the key thing there is that the continuum of experience was there, but there was no awareness of that continuum of experience. There was consciousness, but it was consciousness of a dark or undetermined nature. So there was still some kind of existence going on. But let's get to that another time. I mean, that is an interesting conversation. That gets into what's called Buddhist psychology, and eventually we'll talk about that. But what we're trying to do in meditation is we are trying to get our mind into a state of health and fitness so that it is entirely under our control rather than we are entirely under its control. And control isn't the best term because it doesn't mean, we're manipulating our mind. But the meditative system starts by trying to develop stable attention. It's the first order of business for any meditation system, is to stabilize the faculty of attention. When we can stabilize attention, that means that if I'm meditating on this microphone and I'm resting my eyes on it, my attention is placed on the microphone, and even though other things may appear in the periphery, Nothing will take my mind away unless I want to take my mind away. So if I'm listening to someone and they're talking and I place my attention on them, I will not be distracted. For a meditator, what this typically means is you place your mind on the feeling of the breath, and after a minute or so, you lock in. And everything else relaxes because the mind will not move. It won't be distracted. And you can sit for 45 minutes with no distraction. Now, that's not something that just clicks in. It's built brick by brick. So how? That, by the way, that's the first milestone of meditation practice. There are about 4 or 5 milestones. The first one is that attention is stable. And so in our practice of shamatha, which means calm, abiding meditation, what we're doing is we're working to develop the muscle that stabilizes the mind. And in order to develop that muscle, we have to overcome the atrophy that muscle currently has. Because that muscle is weak, other things have come in and taken over, and those are the 5 hindrances. So if you've ever had to, if you've ever tried to plant a garden and tend a garden year after year, you know that if you don't get on it around May or June, it fills with weeds. But if you get on it early and you start weeding things while they're small, the soil is good, you can plant the things you want in that garden and they will grow. They will grow. But no gardeners here? Is that what I'm seeing? You're a gardener. A little bit? Okay. I'd use a football analogy, but I don't have one. When we don't have strong and stable attention, what happens is our mind scatters consistently every few seconds, and we're not able to stabilize our attention on things in our life long enough to have a consistent and grounded relationship to them. Typically, we're able to sustain attention on a few things in our life that are very important to us. So someone could have very, very weak attention overall, but they could be an excellent pianist. They've specialized their attention, and they're able to sustain attention for that one thing, or a runner who gets into the zone. That's someone who's stabilized attention, and they're beginning to feel all of the it's called flow, the flow state. You've heard of that, I'm sure. But they're able to feel the benefit of sustained attention. But when they're done with that activity, it does not generalize to other things in their life. Their mind is not able to just stay put on whatever. But when they run or when they play piano, it does, but it doesn't generalize. The difference with meditation is that it does. It generalizes. You're going to the very root of the problem, and you're developing something which then sort of shines through all of your activities. So the first objective of meditation practice is to stabilize attention. Meditation practice is going to consist of 2 faculties of experience. One is attention, and one is awareness. They're both very important. And when attention and awareness are in optimal balance, we call that mindfulness, or sati in Sanskrit. So it operates in 3 ways: scanning, getting captured or captivation, and alternating attention. So scanning is what our minds are doing most of the time. They're paying attention to the environment, both the external environment and also the internal environment of whatever thoughts are arising. And what scanning is doing is it's looking for something of interest or importance. It doesn't necessarily have an agenda for what's going to be interesting or important. It just kind of goes with whatever catches its eye. So if I'm trying to just relax in the room and just be here, and then I notice the blue of this book, scanning might say, ooh, blue. And then I look at the book, and I'm maybe there for a second or two, but then I notice the green of the plant. And now I'm looking at that. Within 2 seconds or 3 seconds, I've forgotten that I was looking at the book. There's no residue or continuity in my experience. And this is a problem. We're forgetting what we were doing again and again. So every hour of our life, we may be investing all of our attention in something. 10 seconds later, we've already forgotten because now we're interested in the next thing. And this is certainly not a way to develop stable attention. But there are other problems that this can bring up, which I'll mention. But scanning is first. Scanning is attention that is just roaming about, looking for anything of interest. Getting captured is what happens when the mind has settled on one thing and then something else pulls it away. Captured is that moment of forgetting the previous thing. Does this make sense? Everybody experiences this, and everyone, when you describe it, will go, yeah, that's for sure. But there's a third type of activity that our attention is engaging in, which is called alternating. And this is subtle. This typically isn't noticed until someone's attention has gotten to a relatively mature state, the third stage or the fourth stage of shamatha. We can hear about it, but we don't necessarily see it. In Buddhist psychology, or the Buddhist explanation of mind, which comes from a tradition of meditators who've been looking at the mind, we divide moments. The smallest amount of time is a moment, and a moment is roughly equivalent to the snap of a finger. Within that snap of a finger, the mind has at least 300 subdivisions. Some traditions say 600 subdivisions. But what's going on in any one of those subdivisions is the mind is paying attention to one thing and one thing only. It can only ever pay attention to one thing or one thing only. And this, by the way, is a current perspective too of neuroscience. The mind is only able to engage with one thing at a time, and what seems like multitasking is not actually doing multiple things at once. It's the mind rapidly alternating. So we know this now. I mean, this is sort of the consensus in psychology. Well, this is definitely the consensus in Buddhist psychology. So we have almost 3,000 years of people who have used this system to understand that the mind is constantly alternating, rapidly fluctuating from this to that, to this, to that, to this, to that. So if I am just an ordinary, untrained person who's going to try to put my gaze on this lip balm, how many of those 300 subdivisions of every moment is my attention going to be on the lip balm? Just enough for me to know that my attention is there. So maybe 20? Alternating attention is something that we cannot even access until we stabilize attention to begin with. So when we can get to the point where the mind feels like it's placed on an object continuously, at that point we begin to notice that, wait a minute, no it's not. It's doing this. That would have been way too subtle for us to see earlier. So at the second stage, the first milestone in meditation is stable attention. Attention can be placed and it doesn't move. And that takes some doing. The second major milestone is called Unification of Mind. And what that means is you overcome alternating attention. So if I'm trying to meditate on this microphone, and most of my attention is flowing to this microphone, but then this lip balm, appears in the periphery, as long as this is in the foreground and this is in the background, I'm still stably on this. But occasionally, the roles will reverse in meditation. This is when you're not paying attention to the breath, you're now paying attention to a thought. But you haven't completely forgotten the breath. The breath is still there in the background, but a distraction has entered the foreground. That's called alternating attention. And that continues all the way up to the 7th stage of shamatha, which is a very powerful meditative state. At the 7th stage of shamatha, you have unified the mind so that it is now completely without distraction. It's a clean cognition that persists through the session for as long as you want. It also begins to have an effect on the body. So in meditation practice over time, intentional movements of attention gradually replace spontaneous movements of attention. Our mind is haphazard to begin with, and we begin to train it by prioritizing that the mind stays on one object. And we overcome the challenges to do that. We can't do it all at once. It takes time, hundreds of hours. And when we have gotten to the point of being able to stabilize the mind, we are then able to look more closely at that stability and see the activity within it. Our mind is then able to move more closely into that and then stabilize that too. And at that point, we have come very close to attaining what the meditative systems would say is real mental health. And that's where we talked. Did we talk yesterday about the arising of joy? That was last night. So when we do this, we have removed something from our human experience that was causing us pain our entire life, and that is wandering mind. Wandering mind does not lead to anything other than suffering. What is the worst thing that we do for our own happiness? We let our minds wander. That is a sign of sickness. So when we have overcome wandering mind, we have replaced it with these powerful mental factors that were always there, but they weren't able to come forward. It's just there was too much noise, and so they were undeveloped. But when we quiet the noise, at the same time of quieting the noise and stabilizing attention, these other factors come forward. And we end up in a very cheerful, joyful state of well-being, and that can catalyze the culmination of this path, which is the insights, which are ultimately called bodhi. So I have a little bit more, but are there any questions so far? There are no questions. Let me test you.
All right, so a question going back to when you were mentioning, like the pianist or someone working out, and they achieve certain amounts of attention during those things, or concentration and focus.
Is that on?
I guess not. All right. All right. So going back to the idea that people achieve attention or focus on attention during certain tasks that are not meditation, so like working out or things like that.
Uh-huh.
Can you move that from those things into meditation, or is it?
So if you have a certain
autonomous?
if you have a certain amount of developed attention in something else that you're doing, can you bring that into meditation and have probably? I mean, I don't know. I think it's going to the early stages of meditation for anyone are stages of cleaning up the level of confusion and what's generally the mind has been sapped of its energy. Wandering mind eventually decimates your vitality until you're just kind of like this in your life. So anyone who approaches meditation is going to have their own history and their own situation. Some people have led very disciplined lives, and the discipline of their lives is just going to make it easier for them to do that. So yes, in that case, yes. I spent many, many years playing guitar, hours a day. And I thought that when I started meditating that it would be easy for me. And it didn't seem to have any effect whatsoever. It was very hard for me. And I may be ADD, I'm not sure. But even people with ADD, the first 3 stages of meditation are said to be maybe a little bit more difficult, but once they've gone beyond the 3rd stage, ADD has nothing to do with it. Now they've stabilized their attention and they're on the same road that everyone else is. So people can have a head start in this, but not by much. And it takes effort. So the two words that we really want to come away from a talk like this with are directed and sustained attention. So directed attention, the Sanskrit term for that is vitarka. And vitarka means to aim. You're aiming your attention at something. So, okay, I'm going to take up meditation. I'm going to follow the feeling of my breath. It doesn't just happen on its own, as we're all aware of. You don't just sit down and just relax and have something happen. That's just the same thing you've been doing all your life. So you sit down and you learn to aim your attention at something. And that in itself is a skill that is going to be either pretty easy for you or really difficult. I was someone who could not get that down. That took years for me. It takes days for most people. That was so difficult for me. I could not understand. I couldn't find the breath, for example. That took a very long time. So whatever I was doing, that sucked. That was hell. But as soon as I started to understand, oh, okay, I'm getting it, it was a skill that was so precious to me because I'd never had it. I was never able to pay attention to anything. I just wasn't. It was very hard. I was able to pay attention to like an opportunity to make a funny remark. I could sniff those out. Like, I don't know what the teacher was saying, but I could tell that there was one of those pauses where I can now disrupt everything they've been doing. I was good at that. But I don't think that has anything to do with directing attention. I think that's just pure evil. So vitarka and vichara are 2 skills that we develop. Vitarka is aiming our attention at an object. Vichara is sustaining it, keeping it there. And so one way of thinking about this that occurred to me, say we notice that the backs of our hands are unsightly, they're dry, and we're getting ready to go out on the town, and we want to look good. So our unsightly, dry hands, perhaps our dishwasher didn't come in today, so we had to wash the dishes ourselves, and now we have dishpan hands. So we open up some shea butter. Everybody know what shea butter is? Is that a fair analogy? And our intention is to get a glob of shea butter and put it on our hands and rub it in all the way so that it's not too shiny. Okay? So vitarka is aiming. Vitarka means aiming. We aim our intention to get the shea butter, and now we want to carry through and get the shea butter onto the back of our hands. But at a certain point, as our eyes are moving over to our hand, we notice our toothbrush is out of place. And we have already forgotten this. And we reach over and grab the toothbrush. But then we realize, oh, I have shea butter on my hand. And now the toothbrush is there. And we pick up the toothbrush and we put it away. And then we reach over to get the shea butter off it. But we still have shea butter on our hand. And now there's more. That right there is the failure of sustaining our intention. And this is the sort of thing that in our mind, we intend to follow the breath. And so we put the mind on the breath, but we're not able to keep it there. So our intention lifts and attaches to something else. We still have the aiming, but the aiming is haphazard. It doesn't aim and stay and stick to the thing. So applying vitarka is the first step, but it has to be followed directly with the application of effort to sustain the placement. It's very important that happens. We won't be able to develop meditation if we just do the first thing. So the way that one of the traditions, I think it's Burmese, talks about this is rubbing it in. Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, but I was just told the battery's dead.
Is it?
It keeps turning off.
Oh.
So here's a question, true confession, both maybe. So you talked about spontaneous wandering versus directed wandering.
Mm-hmm.
This requires an evaluation. I'm sitting there practicing, and I hear the garbage trucks, and I think, oh shit, it's Wednesday. I haven't put the trash out.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll get up from the cushion and put the trash out. That was probably a good decision.
That was a good decision. Agreed.
But what about all the other dozens or hundreds of decisions I made? I'm really uncertain. So how do you evaluate whether the redirecting of attention is worthwhile, or you're just avoiding something, or coming from a place of habit?
Mm-hmm. So I think your question is, if you're sitting down to meditate and you're going to direct your attention to your breath and try to sustain your attention so that it doesn't leave, but other things are happening in your life, like, I could unload the dishwasher too. Or, I could listen to the radio instead. I mean, is that what you mean?
Well, not quite, because that's just kind of an entertainment escape. This is something like, or even sometimes you have kind of an insight, and it's like, well, should I put my attention on this insight and see if it really is worthwhile? It's a matter of making the decision.
Oh.
Sometimes it's obvious. In the case of the garbage truck, I think it's obvious. But sometimes it's like, sometimes I know, no, this is pointless, go back to your breath. But other times it's like kind of on the fence, you know?
Yeah, what that sounds to me like is not having a clear intention for what you're trying to do with your meditation practice. If your meditation practice is something where you want to attain a known result of stable attention, then anything short of an emergency or a missed garbage pickup, anything short, is going to atrophy your attention. So nothing, your priority is to direct and sustain your attention on a known object. And there can be no compromise. That's how clean cut it is.
But it's a slippery slope.
Is there?
It's an emergency that you go, you know, what is not an emergency? I mean, it's not, for me, it's not like listening to music or I want to go play a video game.
Well, how many emergencies are there? You got the the recycling? Okay, does your garbage come every day?
No, but I got to try to think, which day is it?
Oh man, scheduling is such a big problem, isn't it? No, but like, what else other than the garbage?
Well, if I'm pondering a
problem already. You're meditating. You're not pondering a problem. Ponder later.
I agree, but sometimes it pops up.
That's because your mindfulness is weak.
That's true.
So what you're talking about there is the inability to sustain attention, which is what we all start with. You have options when you don't have any ability to sustain attention, but once you can sustain attention, you don't have options anymore because you're sustaining attention. These are not options, they're distractions. So you keep with this. And when this is here, no, you know that's going to come up. But wait a minute, I have an idea that could make me rich. Not now.
Right.
So it's the decisiveness of meditation that's the key. It's actually called intention.
So can you instinctively know the difference between just being, sometimes it's clear between a real emergency and something that's just pulling your mind away.
You're not using the microphone. I got that microphone for you.
The microphone battery is dead.
No, it's not.
He told me it was dead.
I know,
He
but
looks like an honest guy.
yeah, but is it dead?
It's a red light.
Well, it's dying.
We're all dying. But.
Yeah, that's right. Keep going though. What?
So, okay, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
There are so many things that we as modern meditators have learned and done that have nothing whatsoever to do with the actual generation of meditative stability. 90% of the meditation instructions I've heard in my life are almost worthless because they don't develop stability. Part of the reason for that may be that most Western teachers don't think that we'll do it, so they talk about the stuff that you can access once the mind is stable. But they talk about that first. And then you're left with, it's like you go to a gym, you wheel your wheelchair into a gym because you think it's a physical therapy place. It's not, it's a gymnastics place. And you're like, I can't do that yet. And they're like, well, just watch. And pay to watch. But you want to do that. You don't want to watch other people do it. Well, they don't work with people who wheel themselves in. So who does? We do. You've wheeled yourself in. So really, your time is precious. And if you are going to make the decision to meditate, you should probably have a clear reason why and a clear experience or an accomplishment that you want to attain. You might want to know what is possible and then say that, I want that. And so there are different types of benchmark experiences that you could go for. I recommend that anyone who wants to meditate should meditate to the point where they are able to develop meditative equipoise, the stable mind of the 4th or 5th stage of shamatha. That will change your life, and that's the first real benchmark. It's not that difficult to do. It can be done, and it gives you access for all of the higher things, such as knowledge, wisdom, awakening. But there will be no awakening without stability.
So scanning still happens, but capture doesn't?
No, scanning doesn't happen. Scanning is the first thing that goes away. Scanning goes away around the 2nd stage of shamatha. Now, it goes away during meditation, not during your life. But because you've been able to experience it in meditation, you are more aware of, wow, look at my mind is just all over the place as I drive to work. Used to be like that in meditation, but it's not now. You can take pride in your accomplishment. When you get to the culmination of this part of the meditation path, the 9th stage of shamatha, all of the qualities of stability, clarity, energy that's coming up begin to bleed into your life for several hours after a meditative session. If you continue to do that, you develop what's called suppleness or pliancy, which is where your nervous system and your actual body begin to change into much stabler, lighter organisms, or organs, or whatever you want to call it. And your meditative stability begins, like here's your morning session one day and your morning session the next day, they begin to bleed like this, so that your mind is now always that way. Your meditation sessions are deeper than your non-meditation hours, but they're very similar. So that's possible, and you can meet people who have accomplished that, and you can tell something's different. But it's not quite clear what. They're not levitating. It's not goofy. But there's something going on in the accomplishment of that mental fitness. So, but you will be able to attain that. All of you will be able to attain that. We all can attain that, but it doesn't happen on its own, and it doesn't happen through not knowing what to do. That's why it's just important that if someone really wants to meditate and they want the benefits of meditation, they have to put a training system into effect, and it has to be consistent. And it doesn't happen, and you heard me say this last week. It doesn't happen in 15 minutes a day. It's just not that kind of thing. It would be great if it did. But that's a little bit on the side of not quite enough.
So how do you distinguish between scanning and awareness?
Scanning and awareness?
Yeah, so even if you're in deep meditation, you're not in a trance, right? You're still aware of what's going on.
Oh, you're definitely, yeah, you're never in a trance in any type of Buddhist meditation. You're always very awake to what's going on.
So what is this subtle difference?
Well, scanning, are you going to come tomorrow night by any chance? Because we're going to talk about awareness
I
then.
don't know, I forgot this was going on.
Did you forget this now? No. Oh, so awareness is a faculty. So awareness is the mind that is able to holistically see what is going on in conscious experience. Attention seeks one thing out from everything that's going on, either externally or internally. So we have what's called extrospective attention. I'm paying attention to Elena's nose. Or we have introspective attention. I'm paying attention to my state of mind. Those are two directions of attention. But attention, as opposed to awareness, because scanning is a function of untrained attention.
Okay.
So attention finds something in particular and tries to stabilize itself so that it can analyze and interpret. So an example of that is if I were to hold up a book like a foot in reading distance from your face, you would be able to just read it. But what if I started doing this? Like I was just a joker, okay? Well, provided it was slow like that, you would find a pace okay, now you can kind of make it out. You're going through a stabilizing effort because attention needs to grab something and keep in contact with it until it understands it. But this is the kind of thing that if I were doing this in a big city, someone could pick my pocket and I wouldn't know. Because when you attend to something with that type of intensity, you lose awareness. So awareness is contextual, it's holistic, it doesn't analyze, it's fast. So attention is slow. It needs to get to the thing and it needs to spend time with it. Awareness is immediate. You see a car coming this way and you step out. That wasn't attention, that was awareness. So when something enters the field, what are you smiling about? Okay.
Enjoy.
All right, smiling is fine. Attention and awareness work together. And in order for meditation to develop, we first work with attention. We have to stabilize the mind so that it can stay put. What is attention going after? Well, ultimately, attention is going after this moment. And it's trying to track this moment. Not something that happened in the past, not something that may happen in the future, and not even a thought about what is going on now. So thinking to yourself, here I am in the present, I'm meditating. I'm meditating in the present. That's not attending to the present. That's not attending to this moment in a meditative way. That's still being kind of distracted. But it's better than nothing, I should say that. Yes?
So, I guess I get.
Let's pretend like we have a microphone.
I wonder sometimes about the intensity of that concentration because
Yes,
I feel happier. But sometimes it's like Jeffrey's going like it gotta be ready, so I'm like trying to grind on this thing, and then I either lose it or it's just it's like man, I gotta concentrate on my breath till I can feel the oxygen, changing in my lungs.
I've steered you wrong. So the question is, how much? I think, are we done with that? Is that just not working?
It's just all written in.
We have some batteries over here if someone would.
I think it's just a matter of.
Not much longer?
In between.
Okay, thank you. So attention, we want to develop attention. We want to be able to place our mind on an object, a focal object. That is the thing that is going to provide the resistance to build the muscle of attention. Okay? It's just like building a muscle. We need something to pay attention to. We don't just pay attention. We pay attention to something, and we're able to measure our success by how long I'm going to direct my attention, vitarka, to this, there, I've directed it, and now I'm going to sustain my attention, vicara. I'm going to sustain it. How long can I sustain it? Can I sustain it for a minute, 2 minutes? Can I sustain it for 20 minutes? Can I sustain it for an hour and a half? Those would be different benchmarks of health, of doing that. But the question is, well, I want to be the person who can do it for 2 hours, right? And of course, that would be healthy. That's not an extreme sport. That's just fitness. In order to do that, we're going to have to flex and put our attention on it. But if we flex too much, we will ground our awareness, or we'll lose our awareness. And awareness is the thing that tells us when our attention has left the object. So attention's like, I'm going to do it. I'll do it, boss. And it grabs it. And attention's there. It's doing its best. But it's only so strong. And then it does this. It doesn't know it's done that. What knows? Awareness knows. Awareness is the faculty of mind that watches attention place itself. So attention places itself, and awareness is watching to make sure it's there. It doesn't have anything else to do. It doesn't get bored. And as soon as the mind does this, awareness goes, hey, warning, warning, and it alerts you, and you go, oh, right. So you want to focus on, you want to intensify your placement of attention enough to keep it there and not be thrown. But if you put too much on it, then awareness goes down. You strangle awareness out, and then you'll become distracted. So the traditional analogy, this is one of the really famous 3,000-year-old analogies, is how much effort do I put into focusing on the object? And the answer is, it's just like stringing an instrument, tuning an instrument. If it's too loose, it makes no sound. If it's too tight, the string breaks. So not too tight, not too loose. That's the Buddha actually said that. You know, the Buddha was this virtuoso meditator, and the instruction that he gave to one of his students who was a lute player, or a vina player, which is like an ancient lute, was not too tight, not too loose. So you have to be your own tutor in this.
If I can pay attention to something that I can pay attention to my breath, for longer periods than I used to be able to.
That's a sign of progress.
But I don't know if I should feel this vivid.
No. Nope.
Not on this stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, you will.
You're always so animated when you say
Same
stuff.
enough.
Oh, I know.
I'm doing it wrong.
Yeah, I know. But as I age, I'll become a better teacher.
And I have a problem to find that, middle.
So you need to
I'm not feeling
place.
adrenaline,
Right. No, the adrenaline is when you're talking about it, not when you're doing it. Then it's too okay.
That's very relevant for me though too.
Which, the criticism of my pedagogy or the?
Yes, that. What you said earlier around like thinking you get an experience like that has derailed me for months and months. So I realized
Say what it is again that derailed you.
thinking I'd have some kind of like revelation or experience, like some kind of watershed moment.
A state, achieving some state.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that had derailed me for quite a while until I kind of began realizing that I shouldn't be going after that right now. I should be just trying to just focus on keeping my breath for a half hour.
So when you say like an experience, do you mean like an insight, non-self, impermanence, that kind of thing?
Anything. Beyond
Okay.
Just keeping my mind
Okay, I'm going to help you right now. I'm going to sort of tell you when to expect those things. And then they'll be like, oh, well, thanks.
A long time.
No, not that long. Well, it depends on you. It depends on how much time you have. Okay. Insight experiences are the whole point of this path, right? We understand that. I mean, that really is, why did the Buddha even teach this stuff? Because it leads to this thing which is every human being really wants, even though they don't even know it exists. They're looking for that in all the wrong places. That's why they're going through their midlife crisis. That's why greed is overcoming the world. People are looking for some kind of fulfillment or satisfaction. It doesn't come through that. It comes through insight, knowing reality. So that's in a nutshell. We all know that. That's what this tradition talks about. Those insights which are going to transform our life are cognitive events. They're cognitive events where we see and understand something without needing to think about it. We see it, it's that type of thing, right? And that's what you're looking for. So here's the way that works. This is the way, like, texts like this, The Mind and Its Functions, are written to explain how all of these things like attention, awareness, samadhi, all of these things, how they all work together, because it's chemistry, essentially. We want to stabilize attention. Okay, we stabilize attention so that the mind can then stay put, and then awareness can come up, and awareness can then combine with attention to experience something like just the stream of mind in a very stable way. When it is stable, it provides the platform for a faculty called prajna, which you've heard me talk about, which is, it means discriminating intelligence. The faculty of mind which is able to see that this is a microphone and this is a gong. That insight changed my life. No, but seriously. In order for prajna to see egolessness or impermanence, which are the big insights, the mind has to be stable so that prajna can come forward and get it in its sights. It needs to get it in its sights, and then it sees. So when does that happen? It's not going to happen before samadhi. Samadhi is really the 5th stage, 6th stage, 7th stage. But most people who experience those insights report them happening easily, almost automatically, at the 8th, 9th, 10th stage. There's also a 10th stage. We'll talk about that someday. But it can happen at any time. So you don't have to have that. You can meditate in such a way that just one day the mind suddenly just goes into has anyone had an unusual meditation experience where the mind is like 10x'd its stability for no apparent reason? And you may have made the mistake of thinking, I'm there. But then the next day it's back to where it was before.
It's more chasing those. I've had those things happen.
Yes, and then you want them again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the wanting them again isn't a problem. What becomes a problem is not understanding how to produce the conditions again that created that. And if that was an outlier experience, then you're not going to be able to create the conditions and sort of seduce that into your experience again. The safest way is to go stage by stage. First, you develop attention until attention is stable. And then when attention is stable, you try to boot up what's called introspective awareness. So introspective awareness, which is, we'll talk about this tomorrow. Attention is the ability of the mind to see an object and hold to it and not scatter. So when attention is doing its job, it's there. It's like the samurai who's right outside, the daimyo's palace. Not a whole lot going on in the samurai's experience other than just, I'm here to guard the daimyo, right? There's no other function that it needs to do. Once attention is stabilized, and that happens again, the 1st stage, 2nd stage, 3rd stage, around the 4th stage of shamatha, of 9 or 10 stages. Attention is stabilized. This is not difficult. If you come to a week-long retreat, if you don't get all the way there in 1 week, you'll get most of the way there, as long as you're following the instructions. Oh, I'm sorry. She's been here at every session, and now she's like, oh, this is not true. Not true at all.
1 week.
Third stage, definitely. Fourth stage is just a maturation of maybe not the fourth stage. Maybe not the fourth stage. Now, the first time I did these practices, like 20 years ago almost, I was told that the ninth stage should be reachable in 2 weeks. That's what I was told. It takes 2 weeks. So I went into a 5-week retreat, and I spent the first 3 weeks, this was right after 9/11, by the way. So what was this, like a month after 9/11? It was crazy. I was in a cabin in southern Colorado and near the Air Force Base. And I'd never been there before, so I didn't understand that it was near the Air Force Base, and they test the planes and the jets in the valley. So every day I'd hear this. I thought we were at war. I thought we were at war. And that was before, I had, I didn't have my phone where I could just text April and say, are we at war? No. Go back to meditation. That would be easier today. Anyway, I digress, not surprisingly. So I thought that this could all be done in 2 weeks. I had all the commentaries, and I'm like, all right, well, I'll save the last 2 weeks to get to the ninth stage of shamatha. And I'm not going to reveal what happened. I practiced my butt off from early morning until late night. My eyes were so sore because I was, doing all this stuff trying to stabilize the mind. But I can confirm that even for how old was I in 2001? I guess I was 15, 16. Even for a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old, it's doable, man. It is really doable. It's just not sustainable if you come out of retreat and forget to keep practicing, which is what I did. Anyway, the first thing you do is attain stability of attention. The second thing you do is, now that the mind is stable, you don't have to work to stabilize the mind. You've been used to having to keep everything down. Is this the adrenaline you're talking about? Yeah. So you work to just sort of keep the mind placed. And everything is always effort, effort, effort. I'm trying to stay on the edge. No, back. Yeah. You're trying to do that all the time. And then it's stable. And you wake up one morning and the mind is stable and you don't have anything to do. It's like you're retired or something. And it's like, what do I do now? So you read through the commentaries. Well, okay, what's the next stage? I'm now at the fourth stage of shamatha. My mind is stable. Then you test it out again. Okay, I'm going to sit for an hour and see if my mind moves during that hour. So you get in there and stability arises. Maybe 10 minutes into meditation, okay, my mind is stable. And then you just ride it out. And 50 minutes in, you're like, my mind is never going to move. This is incredible. This has just happened like that. That's what it's like. Just suddenly the sky clears. This isn't miraculous. This is just health. And you are the one who put all of the causes and effects in to achieve that health. And now you have it. It's temporary. It will go away if you stop meditating. But the next step is to, okay, now, here's another analogy. I want to see if this works. I've been using this one for 15 years, and it's never worked yet. This is a newspaper, and I'm out in the park. Okay, and I'm reading the newspaper. I've got my donut of attention. And I'm trying to read the newspaper, and then the breeze comes through and starts doing this. And I can't really read it when that's happening. So I do this.
Uh-oh.
But my donut's over here now. And so now I want the donut, but then this happens, and it is really annoying me. So what I do is I look over here and I find a brick, and I put one brick there, and one brick there. Now I can eat my donut and just read the newspaper. And there's no effort that I don't have to put in any effort to stabilize it at all. So what do I do now? Before I wasn't reading, I was trying to hold the newspaper and eat the donut. I was just doing this. I haven't even read the headlines yet. I don't even know what it says. It says, windy day expected, bring bricks, or stay indoors, something like that. But now that it's down, I can read. I can look at it. The mind is stable, and so that's awareness. Now that the mind is stable at the fourth stage of shamatha, you can now pay attention in a much lighter, more lucid way. And what happens then is that awareness begins to expand through your experience. Your experience is stable, and now it's bright, and awareness is there, and you're learning how to be aware of everything that's coming up. And that's the sign. I think you've attained it. That's the Paul Whitehead sign right there. So at that point, you've stabilized attention and you're working with awareness, and this is where you're going to start seeing things about the mind that you've read about before. You're not really going to experience much of that when you're working on stabilizing attention. You will see some things. One of the important points of the meditative path, and we're almost out of time, one of the important things about the meditative path is that you have confidence that's real confidence that you're doing something that's authentic. Because we're all starting out on something which just seems so, I don't know, it's so intangible. I'm going to stabilize my mind. Well, go and tell your physician that. Your physician doesn't have any basis for saying that that's possible or not. Well, maybe a modern physician does. But for the longest time, our health sciences were built on a very partial understanding of what's called introspective capacity of the mind. Like William James, the father of modern psychology, said that sustaining introspective attention for more than 2 or 3 seconds at a time is not possible. William James said that. I mean, I disproved him today a dozen times because I got to 5 seconds. So when we begin this path, we need to know that is this real, or am I just copping to some Asian thing? So the nice thing about it is, well, what's the first milestone? The first milestone is that you learn to direct and sustain attention, and you measure. When you start meditating, and I do this all the time with like new classes, after you've been meditating for a day or so in a retreat, I'll ask you, how long does your placement last before your mind goes away? And you can even interview people before they start meditating. How long do you think? How long do you think you can keep your mind on the breath? Me, I don't know, an hour? People say things like that. Other people are more realistic. Never. But what you find is that it is whatever it is. So maybe you're a person who every time you put your mind on the breath, you can follow 2 complete cycles of the breath, and then you completely forget what you're doing. And then you're mortified, and then you come back and you follow 2 complete cycles of the breath, and then you forget what you're doing. But if you keep it up, by the end of the week, it'll be 20 breaths. And then your mind will wander away, and you'll see that is an improvement. Seeing that there is an improvement tells you there's something to this. And then you begin looking at, well, what's the next benchmark? What's the next step? And it all sounds too good to be true, but it's actually better than it sounds. It can be done, but it doesn't happen on its own. And honestly, the insights that come even in this early stage are insights. They're not profound insights, but they're insights about mental health. What is the outcome of learning how to direct and stabilize our attention? What is the outcome in our life of being able to do that? It's significant. It really is not a skill that we have as a culture. Was anyone in this room trained by your parents or your teachers in school to learn how to sustain intentionally directed attention? Was that ever taught in schools? It certainly wasn't in my schools. And that would have changed my life. But the nice thing about this, like I said at the outset, is that it doesn't really matter when you do it. It doesn't really depend on being young and anything like that. It can be done. So the insights that you get about your mind at every step of the way are helpful and encouraging. But as you go more deeply into meditative stability, the insights become of a next order, a next level. You are able to see things about your experience which reveal that you've been making errors of perception constantly every day of your life since your earliest memories, that there are fundamental errors of perception that are going on, that once you've seen them, you don't make them as often, and that changes your life. So in every stage of the path, meditation is a catalyst. It's a catalyst for healthy qualities of the mind to come forward that were not able to come forward before. And some of those healthy qualities of life have the potential to grow you up really quickly so that you now see things that previously were only seeable by what are called the noble ones, those who have attained meditative equipoise. And it's just human stuff. It's not God stuff.
Those insights are seductresses of your attention, though.
No, they're not. They happen within your attention, and your attention will increase because they happen.
Attention.
Yeah,
A-T-T.
attention.
Well, if you're trying to put your attention on your breath, and you have an insight that takes your attention away from it.
These insights come way after. By the time you're having these insights, you put your mind on the breath at the beginning of the session, and then within moments, it locks in. And now you're just opening. And the insights that come just keep the opening happening.
Well, those are, I'm talking about lower level insights, not insight into.
Well, if you had a lower level insight, such as maybe realizing, my goodness, my mind is always wandering, and that contributes to me being very unhappy. Like an insight like that, yes, you're correct. That if you have an insight, and you will have that insight, you have that insight in meditation, that's fine. Don't go with it. Stay in meditation. Because when you get off the cushion, you might think, where's my diary? When my mind wanders, I tend toward unhappiness. Note to self, don't let mind wander. You're right, yeah. Insights are just what you said. You said what? They're seductresses of your, yep.
Well, if it's an important enough insight, you're not going to forget.
That's true.
After you're done sitting.
Yeah, for sure.
You don't have to stop and think about it.
Well, the other thing that's true, and another thing that's true is it's going to be part of your upcoming sessions. Insights like that, when they come up, everyone has this. This is one of those questions that meditation teachers always have to respond to. Well, wait a minute. When I have an insight, I want to write it down. Some of my best stuff comes. I know. No, we all have heard that. Here's the thing. If I'm sitting today and I'm meditating and I'm starting to have an insight that's like, wow, I'm really seeing something important. I am starting to have an insight which is going to wax more and more in future sessions, and I'll see it. I won't need to write it down. It will be integrated into me. You can bat it away and say, not now, Daddy's meditating. It's fine. It'll come back. It's just a natural outcome of being healthy. So you'll see it. Just like at a certain point, like if you're someone who yells at people, or you're someone who lies to people, or you're someone who's always attaching to people, you get enough feedback in your life that eventually it penetrates and you realize, I'm not going to yell at people anymore. Man, that just creates a miserable life for me and others. And so you just don't do it anymore. You're going to have insights like that through your meditation practice. Okay, it is 8:31. I'm deeply sorry that we went a minute over. 2 minutes over. I'm deeply, deeply sorry.
We'll give you 5 minutes to apologize.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. Sounds
Y-
good.
You're welcome. You're welcome. We have a lot more. We can comb through this at a subtler level too. But it's probably best that the one thing that you as meditators take away from this is the specific event of directing attention, part one, and then immediately following on that, sustaining that attention and make that conscious in your practice. Be aware of doing that. So practice leads to results that you want when you practice deliberately, not when you practice habitually or automatically. Deliberately, you're aware of what you're doing. And at this stage, don't worry at all about self-talk. Okay, here I am. I'm going to direct my attention. Okay, I've directed it. Now I'm going to sustain it. That's good at this level. All that self-talk will be sucked into the object. Sorry, that was very adrenaline-like. It'll be sort of sucked into the object later, and you won't have any self-talk. Eventually, you don't want any self-talk at all. Definitely not. But at this point, you want to remind yourself of what you're doing, because it's so hard to you're sitting there, you know it's happened. You're sitting there meditating, and everyone in the house knows, oh, Clay's meditating because Daddy meditates now. And Clay is in the meditation room, and he's been sitting there for 10 minutes, and he cannot for the life of himself remember what he's doing right now. Why am I in this room? That happens. It's ridiculous. It's embarrassing, but it happens. It won't happen for long. Once you stabilize attention, there's a new sheriff in town.